Today for our daily cancellation, we turn to a married couple in Virginia, Hannah and Blair Keeley, who are getting some media attention because of their claim that they have never once in 30 years of marriage argued or raised their voices with one another. Never once. Never done it. Now, they, for some reason, released a joint statement to Fox News Digital where they made this claim and also imparted 7 tips so that you also can have a perfect relationship. Now, I do kind of like the idea of releasing joint statements to the press with random facts about your marriage. Like, my wife and I could release a joint statement and hold a press conference about the fact that we have never once through our entire marriage owned a microwave. That's true. So maybe we released a joint statement. Who wants to know or cares is the other question. Anyway, right up front, in assessing the legitimacy of this claim and also the credibility of the people making it, there are a few strikes for them and against them. Now, here's something in their favor. They've been married for 30 years and they have 7 grown children. Now, if you want to claim to be a relationship expert, you're not even in the running unless you're married, obviously, and have remained married to the same person. But to get to expert status, you have to at least have, I think, 3 decades under your belt. So they're just over the line there. And you have to have raised children. Sorry, I don't want to hear any relationship advice from childless people because it's a different ball game once you have kids on the scene. These people have 7. As far as I know, all of their kids are currently not in prison. None of them are serial killers, as far as I know. So the Keeleys did something right. All that is to their credit. There are some red flags, though. In the article, Hannah is described as a master life coach, and her husband is in marketing. So you see the combination here, life coach, marketing, sending this out, claiming they've never had any arguments. Maybe there's something there. Actually, on her LinkedIn bio, Hannah describes herself as America's #1 mom coach and founder of Mom Mastery University. It's also, she's a reality TV host. Now, I'm not sure who America's #2 and #3 mom coaches are, or how these things are ranked, or if #2 and #3 know that they're #2 and #3 and would agree with that. I have no idea. Now, no doubt, there are some wise people in this world who give great advice. Okay? You're looking at one of them. But when a person goes into the business of being a wise person who gives great advice and aggressively markets themselves as such, you begin to become a little bit skeptical. Because the first thing any wise person knows is that you should not go around claiming that you are wise. Socrates could have told you that. The whole concept of life coaching, I think, is a bit absurd for this reason, and also because there's no requirements, right, in order to be a life coach. Anyone can wake up one day. You could have an overweight, out of shape, unemployed alcoholic could wake up one day and say, you know what, I'm a life coach now, and I'm an expert in life. And they could just start coaching you on how to live. So I find that dubious. But we could put aside most of that and look at what the Keeleys are actually saying about marriage. Most of the tips they give are pretty good. Pretty obvious and kind of cliched, but they're valid nonetheless. Tips like share your feelings and expectations and challenge each other to grow. Now, these tips are not actually necessary. I mean, you don't need to tell a woman to share her feelings. There's no reason to write that down. No woman, no wife is going to read that and say, you know what, I never thought to share my feelings with my husband. That's, wives generally don't do anything but share their feelings. But that's all fair enough. Some tips are bad. They offer the classic never go to bed angry thing. In the explanation, we're told Hannah and Blair Keeley insist it's important for couples not to go to bed angry. That's because nighttime is when humans often encode their cognitive experiences from earlier in the day. In the couple's own words, anger towards your spouse can easily turn into a belief if you don't manage the thought prior to bedtime. How do we do this? They continued, always affirm the love you have for that person, even if there's no resolution. The ultimate conflict resolution is making the decision, the conscious decision to love. Now, the problem here is that anger is an emotion you can't simply turn off and on like a light switch all the time. So if you're buying into this ridiculous idea that you should never allow yourself to fall asleep while you're angry at your spouse, all that means is that you're going to force yourself to stay awake and your spouse to stay awake while you continue to hash out your issue until you aren't angry anymore. But it's pretty rare that people get less angry and arguments get less tense the later it gets. Sleep deprivation tends to fuel anger and irritation, not cure it. Okay, so in fact, many times the best thing you could possibly do when you're angry is go to bed. That's actually the best thing. Like 99% of the arguments that you've ever had at night, you would have been better off just going to bed. And you wake up the next morning, now with some rest and a little bit of time, and a lot of times you see that what you were angry about was kind of unimportant and silly. I have gone to bed angry at my wife before. I've never woken up angry at her, though. So that's the point. But even if I ever did, that's okay, because anger is not the worst thing in the world. Arguments are not the worst thing. And this ultimately is my problem with this life coaching duo. They probably know more about marriage than I do. I'll accept that. But I am familiar with being a human being. And I know, what I know about being a human being is that anger and conflict comes in the bargain. So they present never arguing as an ideal, something to strive for. But is it? Let's think about that. How could you actually manage to go decades without ever so much as arguing with your spouse or with anyone that you spend that much time with? One way is if you're both perfect, like Christ himself. Assuming that's not the case here, then we're left with other options. Another is to be emotionless robots or lobotomy patients. If not that, if you aren't perfect and if you have emotions and you aren't Siamese twins joined at the brain who think and feel exactly the same all the time, then the only other way to totally avoid arguing is to suppress your anger when you feel it. You'd have to always, 100% of the time, keep the lid on, tamp down any anger that you feel, and funnel everything through the use of I statements and other therapist-approved conflict resolution strategies. Now, if you do this always, all the time, you may never argue. But is that really ideal? Should we be presenting arguments in a marriage like an objectively bad thing to be avoided at all costs? Does the fact that you've never argued, if that's true, make you more of an expert and give you more credibility or less? Now, I admit that maybe I'm biased here because my wife and I are both a couple of stubborn sons of guns, and we both could be argumentative by nature, and neither of us probably would have wanted to marry someone who is at all times meek and mild and avoids conflict. That just sounds boring, frankly. But my bias aside, it seems to me that an argument is simply when two people have diverging ideas about something and they both are insisting on their own point of view. And that's an argument. And it's not bad. There's nothing necessarily bad about that. This is another feminine, just like the idea that I mentioned before, two men are in an argument and the worst thing that could ever happen is any kind of physical altercation. Well, there's also this idea that arguments themselves are always bad things. Arguments happen when people are asserting contradictory viewpoints. Now, there are bad ways to assert your point of view. If you're screaming and cussing, that's bad. Obviously, in a marriage between a man and a woman, if this is an argument between men and women, if you're getting physical, that's always bad. Also, if you constantly feel the need to assert your view about every little thing, then all you're going to do is argue, and that's bad. But if you never assert your view, if you never plant your foot on the ground and say, no, this is how I think we should go about this, and I'm insisting we do it this way, if you never ever do that, well, then your conflict avoidance becomes dishonesty. Your spouse won't know who you really are, what you actually think, what you actually feel, because you're always conforming yourself immediately to whatever the other person wants or feels. I hardly see that as ideal. Now, the point isn't to avoid arguing, but rather to argue well, I think. I don't mean argue well as in knowing how to destroy your spouse with facts and logic, though you should be able to do that, and I have done that to my wife before, whether she realizes it or not. But what I mean is arguing in a healthy way, which means keeping things in perspective, not blowing every little conflict out of proportion. It means staying on topic, okay? Never saying anything that starts with, oh yeah, remember the time when you... It means letting the other person actually say their piece, and it means allowing the argument to end. So once you've said what you need to say, and they've said what they need to say, let it end. Go to bed. Leave the room, whatever. Arguments can be healthy, but the healthy ones have time limits. Every healthy argument can turn unhealthy if it drags on too long. Marital spats are like, gremlins. Don't feed them after midnight. Don't keep it going past a certain point. Say what you need to say, listen to what the other person is saying, and then move on. That's a healthy argument. Such things do exist. They're even, I would say, an important part of your marriage. And that's why I'm not going to cancel the Keeleys themselves, because they seem like nice people. But the idea that they're proposing here is what I'm going to cancel. Hey, listen, hit the subscribe button. Do it right now. I demand it. And I thank you for your compliance. It is somewhat appreciated.